Welcome back. Today I'm going to be bringing you my first safety ranking for the 2027 draft. If you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing as it would be very much appreciated. Now let's jump into it. At 8, I've got Koi Peric out of Oregon, and I've got a day 3/UDFA evaluation. After 2 years with Minnesota, Koi Peric is transferring to Oregon as they attempt to replace the hard-hitting box presence of first-round pick Dillon Tiedemann. Let me be clear though, they've obviously identified a similar profile of player. Hopefully they haven't mistaken Peric for a similar level of talent. Peric entered his freshman college season off the back of a season-ending hamstring injury from his final year of high school, and I can't help but wonder if he's ever been the same since, because he was profiled out of high school as this explosive 4-star recruit who plays multiple sports including track and basketball and can play on either side of the football field because he's just a pure athlete. I did not see that on his film. I see average speed at best, and he looks incredibly stiff. And not just stiff in the hips, in the sense that he's struggling to change direction, but more so in the ankles. He just never looks like he's got his feet underneath him. On top of this, Peric is a switched-on player. He reads offensive plays well, but in coverage, he lacks poise. It seems as though he doesn't know when to read the quarterback's eyes and when to dial in on a receiver. Too often, he's spinning around all over the place. So you combine this with the concerns I have over his movement, I think he is very much a box player. In fact, if he was a little bigger, I might be suggesting a potential move to linebacker. The few NFL teams that still have a clear difference between their free safety and their strong safety, and who line up with their strong safety in the box every single play, that's where Peric needs to go. And even in that situation, I still think there's going to be issues with him in coverage. But for the most part, he does a great job versus the run. He shows intensity and intuition to go and make plays, but also stays disciplined and patient, and shows a strong understanding of pursuit angles. He's well built, he can get off blocks, and he hits hard. What I would essentially say is the nail in the coffin in terms of my evaluation on him is that he does such a poor job wrapping up his tackles, generally due to poor technique more so than execution. But either way, if he's going to be a one-dimensional box safety, I would have really liked for him to be a super reliable tackler. But besides that, he is a good presence to have around the ball. So I think he's got enough about him to hang around on a roster, take some rotational snaps, but I'm not seeing the upside. At 7, I've got Jelani McDonald out of Texas, and I've got a day 2/day 3 evaluation. Jelani McDonald is going into his third collegiate season with Texas, giving him a couple of years playing experience after sitting for his first. He's proven to be a very reliable player for the Longhorns. In fact, one of their best players if you just look at baseline stats, with 69 tackles and 3 interceptions last year. McDonald is a hard one to speak negatively about because most of what he does is just really sound football. He's rarely out of place. I thought his lane integrity versus the run was really sound, which is kind of a rare thing for a safety because they tend to be box crashers more so than lane fillers. But McDonald is more linebacker-ish in the patient and calculated way that he defends the run. He also surprised me with how well he gets off blocks, because at 6'2", 199 pounds, he's a bit skinny for a safety. But again, and contrary to his build, more like a linebacker than a safety in terms of the proficiency and detail in his technique to get off blocks. His footwork in general is pretty choppy, but it's not inefficient. He's got great feel for zone, strong route anticipation, reads the quarterback's eyes really well, and these instincts combined with smooth linear movement is what led to the 3 interceptions last year. This is why safety can be kind of harsh, because all these good things, and I still watch him and think, yeah, he's okay. He's probably a late day 2, early day 3 pick, probably not going to impact the game a ton, and I guess one thing that stops me from being particularly excited about McDonald in any way is that the speed is okay, but there's no real explosion there. I certainly don't see him as the type of athlete you want playing as the single high. He would probably be fine as a free safety in a cover 2, but I feel his best football is played in the box as a true, strong safety. He suits being around the ball from the moment the ball is snapped because of his linebacker-ish patience and discipline defending the run. But also in coverage, I think in a box safety or sometimes maybe even a nickel role where he's clogging up tight spaces and muddying the water for quarterbacks in the busy region of the field. That's where you get the most of his feel for space without exposing a lack of athleticism. So I want him in the box. And yet, he's not very well built, and although he wraps up his tackles well, the approach to his tackling is really sloppy. He has a tendency to go in high and head on, and it doesn't look good. So I see McDonald maybe as a rotational guy in the NFL, but I feel he could be a low-end starter, just probably the starter on a team that you would miss the least if he wasn't there. Some of that is the nature of the safety position. They do often feel like the 11th man on a defense, but I just don't see that spark from McDonald that can make it feel less like that. And as someone who feels like a low-end starter in terms of value, as opposed to a guy who you just have to have on the field, I would like there to be one specific role that I feel really comfortable having him play. There's elements to his game or his physical makeup in each position he could play where I just don't know what his place on a team is. At 6, I've got Marcus Neal Jr. out of Penn State, and I have a Day 2 evaluation on him. After a 2-year career with Iowa State and 1 year of significant playing time, Marcus Neal is following his head coach Matt Campbell and transferring to Penn State. Neal plays in the box for the majority of his snaps, and I expect that to continue in the NFL. Listed at 6'1", 216 pounds, he is well built, but severely limited in terms of speed. First prediction for the 2027 draft, I bet this guy doesn't run at the combine. I would think it gets concerningly close to 4.7 territory. You know who else got close to 4.7 territory? Kam Chancellor. Now I'm not saying Marcus Neal is Kam Chancellor, but I think he's going to be a good player. Neal is a surgical run defender. There are players who do the things that I think they should be doing, which is already a high standard because I've got the bird's eye view. I can see everything. So for a player on the field to go where I can see that they should be going, despite having bodies in the way, the crowd making noise, and everything else that I don't have to deal with as I analyse it, is impressive. Then every now and then there are players who make me go, where's he going? Why is he not chasing the ball carrier? This guy's getting it wrong. Oh no, that wasn't the ball carrier. That was a fake, and Marcus Neal is the only one on the field or off the field who's picked up on it and gone straight to the actual threat. He is truly unfazed by backfield shenanigans. He does not get sold, and then he does an incredible job finding the most efficient path to the ball. In fact, further to this point, I don't have a set amount of film I watch for each individual player. Sometimes one game's enough, but I always watch 2 or 3 just in case of anomalies. I had basically a full report on Neal after 1 game because he's a fairly self-explanatory player. He forced me to watch 3 because of one aspect of his game that I hadn't written a single note on, and that's his ability to get off blocks. The reason I had nothing written about his ability to get off blocks is that he rarely engages in them. He's so good at sorting through the mud and finding clean yet direct lanes to the ball that he's rarely touched. Having said this, I did watch the 3 games and did eventually develop a decent sample size of him trying to get off blocks, and the result was a little surprising. He's not as good at it as you would hope for a player of his build and with his role on a defense. Some of it is his approach. He's very calculated in every part of his game, but I would argue that when facing blocks, it's to his detriment. When trying to beat a blocker, especially for a position like safety, where more times than not, you don't have the size advantage against an offensive lineman or even a tight end, the best strategy is to make it quick and efficient. You fully extend out, you swipe, you shift your momentum around the blocker, and yes, you may end up slightly out of position, but you are now free from the obstacle, ready to relocate. This guy does not like being out of position. He will try to stay perfectly aligned towards the ball carrier by holding his ground versus a block rather than beating it, and he just gets swallowed up. The other thing is that I don't like his balance, which is kind of contradictory to his overall movement skills, because I actually thought he was incredibly fluid. He can twist and contort his body with ease, drop into a back pedal and pounce out of it like it's nothing. He's very smooth in many ways, but a lack of balance is highlighted in a few different parts of his game, not least when confronting a block, where even light contact seems to throw him off kilter. But why am I fixating so much on his ability to get off blocks when I've expressed how good he is at avoiding them anyway? Well, that's certainly a fair point, and it's not a huge issue in his game right now. It becomes a little bit more concerning from the perspective I was seeing it from. I was wondering if this guy could lean even more into a box role by putting on a touch more weight and basically being a hybrid linebacker. The more I watched his film, the more I realised that he is already playing the role he's made for. Having him line up as an actual linebacker would make him a lot more static, and I think it would negate what he does best, which is that he sneaks into the cracks of an offensive line, as opposed to just bullying his way through it. So pure linebacker probably isn't the way forward. He has got a little bit of nickel versatility. As I've said, he's very fluid, and his intelligence versus the run carries over into coverage, where he's generally perfect in terms of his placement in zone. They blitz him a ton for Iowa State, but between his lack of explosiveness and surprising deficiency versus blocks, I don't think his skill set is that well suited to it. So, a pretty simple box safety role with a little bit of nickel would be my positional projection for Neal. Overall, I would say I like the player more than I rate the player. Not to say I don't rate him at all, but I got a real kick out of his intelligence and ability to read the game. He's also a real competitor. He doesn't stand out as much as a couple of other players in this video in terms of how hard he hits, because he lacks that explosiveness, but he hits with force. I also saw him getting into it after the snap with a couple of players. He played through an undisclosed injury last season that he's recently had surgery on, stating that he doesn't like not being on the field. Neal seems like a tough, intense character, which I think is great, especially at the safety position. So he's got things that I personally enjoy, but from an evaluation standpoint, he is just another box player. That's just the way it is. I had a lot more pros than cons on my pros and cons graphic, but the lack of speed is a major factor, as it keeps me from seeing him as the type of player who breaks the perception of a box safety being the 11th man on a defense. At 5, I've got KJ Bolden out of Georgia. KJ Bolden is a former 5-star recruit and will enter the league ready to start for an NFL team. He is a very switched on player, seemingly never out of place, and helps the team in every aspect of the game. He often plays right in the heart of the Georgia defense, just underneath a deeper safety, and he forced many bad throws and bad decisions from quarterbacks by planting himself in the most awkward position possible and reading the eyes like a pro. He's also an incredibly reliable run defender, diagnosing the play early and wrapping up his tackles time and time again. With all this said, Bolden is a good player. I don't think he's got the high-end physical traits to have a significant impact from the safety position. He was a pretty impressive 100-meter sprinter in high school, but I haven't seen that spark on the football field. Don't get me wrong, he's not slow, but he's not explosive either. He also seems very linear as an athlete. In fact, in terms of his ability to accelerate and decelerate, he's pretty smooth, but anything lateral, it's clunky. So he's not the nickel type who you can just leave on a legit receiver. I also don't know that he's explosive enough to be a true cover 3 deep safety. He's great defending the run, but I think he lacks a bit of length, so getting off blocks isn't really his thing. And the lack of true explosiveness and the stiffness in the ankles stops him from being the machine style of run defending safety who is just constantly in the backfield, smashing wide screens and run plays. I think on a good team, Bolden is just another player, which may sound harsh, but I don't really mean it in a bad way or a good way. He is what he is. I would like to see him as more of a strong safety than a free safety, and I think he'll just do his job well, rarely make mistakes, and never look out of place as a starting NFL safety. At 4, getting into my second round evaluations, I've got Ty Benefield out of LSU. After 3 years with Boise State, Ty Benefield could have easily entered the NFL in 2026, but instead decided to return to college and transfer to LSU in an attempt to solidify his draft status against stronger competition. Benefield has played a versatile role throughout his Boise State career. He's played in the slot, he's played in the box, he's played single high, he's been asked to cover man-to-man, he's been asked to blitz, and I think that will carry over into the NFL with what is a pretty well-rounded game. First of all, he's big, listed at 6'3", 208 pounds, which is great, but straight away I'm thinking there's probably going to be some movement limitations, and there is some truth to that. He doesn't have that low center of gravity thing where he can just bend and twist his body with ease, but considering he's a bigger guy, I thought he looked pretty light on his feet. The balance is a bit of a question mark. He ended up on the ground a fair bit, lunging into a tackle and starting to lose his footing before he's got to the player. I also saw a play where the receiver gives him a slight push, before breaking into his route, and Benefield just topples over. You don't really want to see that from a guy with his size, but generally speaking, a pretty loose, bouncy athlete. And fast. Maybe explosive wouldn't be the right word, but he's definitely got some juice to him, and his long strides make him very capable of eating up some ground, especially once he gets moving. I also think for someone who I don't think of as a natural fit for the nickel position because he is a bit leggy, he combats his movement disadvantage versus nifty slot receivers in man coverage incredibly well. He does a terrific job of keeping his man just in front of him, not 5 yards off, but maintaining a slight gap, then waiting for the receiver to make his movement and timing the pounce perfectly. Benefield had a very high missed tackle rate last season at 20.2%, the highest of his career. But I do think this is largely to do with the way he plays the game. Safeties tend to be a long way away from the ball, so sometimes they get the benefit of being the 4th or 5th tackler and keeping their missed tackle rates modest by finishing the job on a guy who's already been slowed down. Whereas Benefield is often right in the mix. First man to the ball in open space, not the easiest tackles to make, but he also can be a bit reckless in these situations. His pursuit angles are sharp and direct towards the player, so if he gets the timing wrong, he's pretty vulnerable to getting his ankles broken. But here's what I love about Ty Benefield. It's hard to have an impact from the safety position. You're not covering their best receiver, you're not in the heart of a defense like a linebacker, you're not a down-to-down pass rusher. The safety is generally not given a designated assignment that is vital to the team's success. So to have an impact, you have to go and find ways to be impactful. Benefield does that. It's why I don't crucify him in my evaluation notes when he misses a tackle or blows a coverage, because he's got that in him as well, by the way, which I'll get to in a moment. But between the ears, it looks on film like he was born to play safety. Sees things early, frequently picks up on pre-snap motions, play fakes, screens, whatever it may be, and he makes 2 or 3 steps in the right direction before the rest of the field starts going the same way. And he's tenacious, attacks what he sees with a vengeance, gets off blocks really well. I've just mentioned that there is the occasional blown coverage downfield, where he doesn't always sell deep the way that safeties are coached to do as the last line of defense. But I like that he doesn't always sell deep. He makes it so much harder for the quarterback by not always playing it safe. It honestly looks as though he gives no extra concern towards the deep ball. He just goes where he thinks the ball is going, which clearly has its pros and cons. The key moving forward for LSU bringing him in, or an NFL team drafting him, is that if you're going to play him in a cover 2, the deep assignment is less clear, because you don't have that single high safety who is clearly responsible for something like a seam route down the middle of the field. So there needs to be communication between the safeties. There needs to be a chemistry built, where they work in unison. It doesn't look like either Benefield or whoever his fellow Boise State safety was on a given play were aware of where the other one was. They were kind of just doing their own thing, and that's where you get the massive blown coverage. Nevertheless, that feels like something he and his future teams could work on, and I really like the player. He's not perfect. He's got solid physical traits, but nothing spectacular. My enthusiasm about Benefield comes from the fact that he is to me what playing safety is all about. Seeing things before anyone else does, and attacking that with a vengeance, making things happen. In terms of his potential NFL role, I wouldn't want him playing as the every down single high safety because I think he would lack the discipline and prove unreliable. But then I think you're going to lose a certain amount of value if he's just lining up in the box every snap because he's quite rangy. I like him not necessarily in a rigid cover 2 scheme, but ideally a team that likes to operate out of a pre-snap cover 2 shell, paired with a slightly more conservatively minded fellow safety that allows Benefield a bit more freedom to not play so rigidly in coverage, to use his intuition and go and break on where he sees the play developing. The other reason this works is that he's got the long speed to start in a deeper position and provide some coverage before still coming downhill quickly enough to make some plays in the box. So a really good football player, impactful football player, with a little bit of a reckless streak here and there, just to make sure the coach's hearts are still working. His LSU transfer should give him the platform to show what he's already been doing on a smaller stage and make a push towards an early draft selection. At 3, I've got Zach Lutmer out of Iowa. Well, Iowa found themselves another one of these nickel, corner, safety hybrid things. The temptation is to say that Zach Lutmer is versatile because you don't really know what to call his position. In fact, I initially watched Lutmer for my cornerback video, but the confusion over whether he's a safety or a cornerback isn't really a sign of versatility. He just plays a position that I don't make a separate video for. Lutmer is a nickel. He plays nickel in college and fits the profile. He is a bit of a loose cannon, in good ways and bad ways. Well built and really quite explosive. Iowa lined him up close to the line of scrimmage a ton and just fired him at the defense, causing chaos. Lutmer's got a great motor, seems very fiery and competitive, but he's a bit sloppy. His vision to find the most efficient path to the ball carrier is careless. He is just head down and go. Plus, he's pretty stiff, takes awkward pursuit angles, and doesn't wrap up consistently, leading to plenty of missed tackles. So, a bit of harnessing required, but Lutmer's got the makings of a real fiery presence around the ball, and he could be excellent in coverage as well. He is definitely a bit stiff, as I mentioned, whether it be laterally or vertically, but his route recognition is really sharp. He's got excellent feel for zone and doesn't just sit back and let things go wrong with the attitude of as long as he's in his zonal assignment, he's not to blame. No, he trusts his eyes and attacks what he sees happening. So this ability to recognize things in coverage, combined with his explosiveness and really high-level ball skills, by the way, could make him a really solid coverage player from the slot in a zone-heavy or an off-man coverage system, on top of the on-the-ball chaos I spoke about previously. The question is, how early do you draft the nickel? The answer seems to be that second round is the spot as far as the NFL is concerned, even for a highly touted one like Jalen Petrie or Cooper DeJean. And whilst Lutmer has the explosiveness that's often lacking from these second round type of nickels, some of the sloppiness in his game could lead to him dropping closer to round 3 than round 1. I like him though. He feels like he could be a really impactful player, despite playing a typically less valued role. Getting into my first round evaluations, at 2, I've got Bronte Johnson out of Notre Dame. Tay Johnson has real talent. More often than not, he plays as the free safety in a Notre Dame defense that plays an absolute ton of man coverage and plenty of cover 3, meaning Johnson's role as the deep safety is a lonely one, often a long way from the action, but always needing to stay alert and stay disciplined, acting as the last line of defense. I feel that he is well suited to his role as the single high safety, and it's the one I see him playing in the NFL. As the safety blanket, with the whole field in front of him and having to sweep from sideline to sideline, range is vital. Johnson is very explosive in short areas and over long distances. He stays really disciplined. The speed allows him to not sell too early, but he is always reading the quarterback's eyes and doing a good job of it. With this said, I wouldn't mind him being a little less reliant on reading the quarterback's eyes all the time. NFL quarterbacks are much better at deceiving these types of DBs who are too fixated on reading their eyes. And I just think there's another level he needs to unlock in terms of his reading of the game, where if he could just be a bit more locked in on the offensive play design as it's happening, and blend this with his ability to read the quarterback's eyes, it would allow him to be a bit more anticipatory and a bit less reactionary, and he could really start making quarterbacks hesitate before they try to throw the ball deep. But after a basically void freshman season, due to a shoulder surgery prior to 2024, last year was Johnson's first taking significant college snaps. So I'm happy with where he is instinctually, but in terms of his potential, there's still another level he can hit as he gains experience. At 6'2", Johnson is tall and appears to have long arms. He's pretty fluid, he's got good ball skills, pulling in 4 interceptions last year, and as much as I think his skill set lends himself nicely to a deep safety role, Johnson is certainly someone who is capable of having an impact in the box. He's very switched on to the run, gets off blocks with ease, and has been one of the most reliable tacklers in the country. The shoulder surgery that caused him to miss most of 2024 is a bit of a concern for me, because although I couldn't find any other reports of the injury being an issue in 2025, I was watching his game versus Boston College in Week 10, and he was clearly holding his arm after a play before he had to come out of the game for a few snaps. I also thought he gave up on plays just a little bit earlier than I thought was appropriate, where, okay, you're probably not going to get there and impact the play, but those real feisty safeties are just on a constant rampage from the start of the snap to the end of the snap. And that is what I would ideally like to see, but I'm not going to draw too much of a conclusion from that in terms of his attitude. It's just a minor thing I noticed. I think Johnson has all the traits to be an elite safety at the next level. At 1, I've got Bray Hubbard out of Alabama. Bray Hubbard is one of, if not the most captivating player I've looked at in the 2027 draft class so far. He came out of high school as a dual threat quarterback and committed to Alabama, where from what I can gather, he immediately started a transition to the safety position and barely touched the field in his freshman season of 2023. Then early in 2024, he came in and replaced an injured safety and hasn't been taken out of the lineup since, which is totally unsurprising to me. I don't know how you could take this guy off the field after watching even a handful of his snaps. The guy is a machine, super explosive, and just an absolute menace. There's loving the game and then there's just being a psycho. Hubbard is a psycho in the best possible way. He's not picking up flags with late hits or starting unnecessary drama after the snap, but he's really a throwback to what I think people miss about the game today. He hits so hard. Whether it's required in the situation or not, he is like a rabid dog, waiting for his opportunity to smash someone. Bray Hubbard might be single-handedly bringing back the hospital pass. So between this explosive speed and extreme tenacity, I had to try and keep myself in check from an evaluation standpoint, because the difference between loving a player and rating a player is an important distinction to make. And he's not perfect. Hubbard seems to have put on a ton of weight since his high school days as a quarterback, and like I say, he's still incredibly explosive, so that's great, but his natural biomechanical makeup isn't ideal. I generally avoid making too many concrete assumptions about body measurements just based on film, because it's a complex thing. There's all sorts of different factors that can trick your brain, like the angle of the All-22, the size of the guys around him, or even the way he's wearing his uniform. But to me, Hubbard looks very high-waisted and appears to have short arms. High-waisted is how I would describe his movement. Vertically, his ability to control his speed, the back pedal, the way he's able to stick his foot in the ground and pounce, really smooth. And it's kind of deceptive because he's light on his feet, he seems very loose in many ways, and then you see him try to change direction laterally, and it's just a bit awkward. He is also still learning how to read the game from the safety position, particularly defending the run. And there was a moment watching his film where I felt kind of stupid because I was watching it thinking, this guy is kind of all over the place versus the run. He's getting sold on blatant backfield decoys. His lane integrity is shaky. He's taking inefficient paths to the ball carrier. So why is it that in coverage, he seems to have this super advanced awareness of where he should be and where the quarterback's going to throw the ball? I almost feel like he's in the mind of a quarterback, as if he's had these experience from the quarterback's perspective before or something. And then I realised he was a quarterback in high school. He had 4 interceptions last year, 3 interceptions the year before, which is incredibly impressive, especially for a guy who is largely playing in the box. Which leads me to one of the most exciting parts about Bray Hubbard. I've spoken in this video about how it's difficult to have an impact from the safety position. They kind of feel like an extra player at times, not having one key role that blatantly helps the team in a big way, just doing whatever. But there's an evolution that's happened in the last few years where the safeties who genuinely feel like they bring a ton of value to their team are the ones who flip that statement on its head and give a whole new meaning to just doing whatever. I think Hubbard can be the chess piece for a defense. I love him in the box. I think some of his rawness in reading the run has been accentuated by what Alabama are asking their defenders to do at the moment. Their defensive coordinator, Kane Womack, calls it the swarm defense, and I believe it means Hubbard is being asked to play direct, attack the line of scrimmage. I'm not saying he's free of responsibility, because he's not reading it well, and that needs to be worked on. But I also don't have a lot of doubt that with his instincts in other areas, and with the fact he's still learning the position, that it's only a matter of time before this improves. And he wraps up his tackles really well, drags defenders down with force like a wolf capturing his prey. He could be a killer versus the run. He's also a major blitz threat. I definitely prefer him in a zone-heavy scheme, but in that scheme, I think his speed and his route anticipation could make him an effective nickel, even with a little bit of stiffness. And something I rarely saw him do for Alabama, but he could be great at, is a single high safety role. Again, the slight stiffness wouldn't be ideal, but with his explosiveness to cover sideline to sideline, his ability to read the quarterback's eyes, his ball skills, I don't see why he wouldn't succeed in that role as well. So it would be easier for me to paint the narrative that yeah, this is an exciting, traitsy player, but still learning the game, a bit raw, for now let's call him a day 2 project. I just don't believe that. What I see on the field is a guy who will seriously impact NFL games, both with his pure explosion and ferociousness, and with his potential versatility. Incredible player. So, early thoughts on this safety class based on the 8 that I've watched. Phenomenal. Safety is not considered to be a very high value position, and it's easy to play devil's advocate with the low value positions and question why they aren't valued higher. I'm on board with the idea that safety isn't a very valuable position, and I feel like I've laid out the reasons why throughout the video. But with that in mind, to only watch 8 players for this ranking and come away with 2 first round evaluations and 4 day 2 evaluations, 2 of which I've specifically labelled as second rounders, I think that makes this a really strong safety class. The main position right now that I do feel is getting a bit undervalued is linebacker, which is what I'll be bringing you next, so stay tuned for that. If you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing, it would be very much appreciated, and I'll see you next time.